first of all, I'll start with a little explanation of what Uptycs is. Uptycs is a platform for using security data, most of which comes from the open source agent OS Query. So what we do is we aggregate the data from OS Query, which is a very powerful open source security agent that transforms your operating system, making it look like it's an SQL database. So because it's structured data, it makes it incredibly easy to ask questions using regular SQL without having to learn a brand new query language. So these queries get scheduled on the different endpoints, Mac, Linux, Windows. In this case, we're going to be talking about Mac. And the data gets streamed back to the Uptycs platform, where you can use it in a variety of different ways, right? Like you can write the query in real time and see what's going on, but you can also see back in time, run reports for compliance for things like SOC 2 or CIS. You can do file integrity monitoring, and you can do threat investigations. Now, the great thing about OS Query is it was definitely written with Mac first as a concept. It's great on Mac, it's great on Linux, and it's very good on Windows, as opposed to a lot of other tools that are sometimes written for Windows first and then ported to Unix platforms. So the type of data we get through that covers users logged in, network connections being established, security configuration. There's hundreds of tables there. So the use cases are almost infinite, really. We're going to be talking about security now, but it's got a lot of potential for other IT use cases. Specifically for Mac, a few things I like to do with OS Query is perform inventory. So of course, OS Query can't know what machine it's not installed on. But once you have OS Query running on a Mac, you'll know everything about the hardware that it's running on, the software. And when I say software, I mean applications installed, but also homebrew packages, browser extensions, what users exist on that machine, what SSH keys are out there. So that really lets you build an inventory of what's out there and track it well. Then you can use that for intrusion detection as well, because we know what's installed, we know what processes are being executed, what network connections are being established. We can detect things like Mac malware. We can use threat intelligence to detect connections to suspicious IPs or URLs. And we have a very powerful alerting engine in the back, so you can know when something suspicious is going on without being overwhelmed by alerts. And because we've got all this data, of course, you can use it for compliance, right? Like if you look at the CIS benchmark, there's a bunch of settings that you need to be sure are configured properly. We already have all that data in the central database of Uptycs coming from OS Query. So then it's just a matter of writing reports for that. And we've got a bunch of reports for a bunch of different compliance regimes out there. Then one specific use case I'll show you is user-driven security. So the idea here is for companies where people have local admin privileges, sometimes it's nice to be able to let them manage their own computer, and that means giving them control over some security settings. So what we're going to do with OS Query is we'll check over time that these settings are configured properly, and we'll warn a user when they're not. So what I'll do now is I'll switch to a virtual machine. I'll switch to a browser first. So what you see now is the Uptycs interface. And this is our Mac Health dashboard. So as you can see, I've got a bunch of data there, most of which are some VMs that I'm running for testing purposes. Others are just fake data. I'm just going to refresh you have the latest thing. So these are some settings that are really important to a Mac, right? Is the firewall enabled? Is auto update enabled if you don't manage updates otherwise? Is file vault enabled, and so on. And it's really nice to be able to track the compliance of these settings over time. But if you were in a company where the graph looked like this, I would think that, well, you're probably not managing a whole lot centrally because things seem to hover between 40 and 70% compliance. And then you had a problem here where file vault compliance dropped to 0. So probably some people just disable that. So if you don't have the ability to enforce those settings 100% of the time, then it's nice to be able to have the user do that. Of course, if you're a bank, you wouldn't have a bank teller configure the security configuration of their machine. But if you have security engineers, if you have developers, maybe they just need to turn off the firewall for 20 minutes for troubleshooting and they forget to turn it back on. So with the power of OS Query, we have a table that's able to identify the Slack username of the person using the machine. So if I look here, Guillaume's Mac right here is the virtual machine I'm going to show you later. So as you can see, it's online and it's got a bunch of different tags applied to it. One of which is our Mac health check tag. So that enables the features where we verify the configuration of these different settings. But what you can also see is here, I know who's logged into that machine. This is my Slack account. And yeah, I know my email address is kind of funny, but at least no one ever forgets it. Now that we have that, this is really powerful. This is powerful for a bunch of use cases, including user-driven security. But that can also help you with inventory in general, because in some cases, the username is not in the machine's name, right? And you might not have the latest up-to-date inventory information. That can help you identify who's actually using that machine day to day if you're using Slack. Then in my configuration, I'm using Uptycs compliance configurations, which is a way of ensuring that settings are configured as we want them to be configured. So as you can see, we support CIS for AWS because we can ingest data from that. There's a bunch of different compliance you can do. But in this case, I'm interested in my Mac security policy, which consists of these 7 different checks. We're checking if auto update is enabled, if file vault is enabled, gatekeeper, and all of that. And these are currently created by Uptycs. However, the data format for them is all SQL based, so it would be really easy for someone to create them. And that's a feature that we are going to open up soon so you can create your own. But right now, the way it works is we have some customers using that, and if they need a specific check, we've been creating them for them as we're going through multiple releases of this. So as you can see, the query looks a little bit complex because it's using our backend database, but you could also have some much simpler queries here. And for each of these, we have remediation information as well as screenshots. So that's actually the reason why we don't allow creating your own right now. We just don't have the ability for you to upload screenshots, but that should be coming pretty soon. So you can enable or disable these checks. You know, maybe you actually don't require auto update because you're pushing out updates some other way. You would simply disable it here. Now, as soon as you do that, the data starts being streamed from all of your Macs that have the proper tags on them, so we can know the current state of these. Now, this is the Uptycs Investigate view. This is how you would use OS Query through Uptycs for anything. So if you wanted to run a real-time query, you could just run that query right here in Uptycs and see what's going on, right? Like what users exist on these machines. And these are all the user accounts that exist on that Mac I've just provisioned. But for all these different compliance checks, what we do is we provision some custom tables that include the status for these different checks. So instead of doing a real-time query to the machine, I'm going to do a query to our global database. Just blanking on the name of the table, QP Mac health check Q. Firewall enabled. I see, and then my autocomplete pops up just after I'm done. I'm sorry, I'm in the VM, so it's a little slow. Then when I run this, I'll see the different values for each machine that is reporting to the compliance module. And in this case, you can see over time, and I've been playing with that VM quite a bit, the value of my firewall being enabled or not was off, and then in the end, it was on, meaning that it is compliant. This is what we use to build the dashboard I was just showing. This is also how we are able to let the end user know about that. So now I'm going to switch to a virtual machine. So you should see a Mac now with Slack running. And if we look at my software update configuration, software update is disabled, and that's one of my checks. So the way it works is we have a bot called Automate, which is the Uptycs security robot. And you would just ask it for a report, and the report gets prepared, and then we'll send it to the end user directly, telling them what settings are not configured properly. And it takes, there you go, we've got the report. And it's telling me that, okay, you've passed 6 checks, but you failed one. And the one you failed is for auto update. Here's how you would remediate that, right? So it's telling me to go to my system preferences, go to software update, and then click automatically keep my Mac up to date, which I'm just going to do right now. So that report, that was just requested on demand by myself as I'm doing a demo right here. It can be requested by end users if they have a specific concern. But as soon as a setting goes out of compliance, when it was compliant before, you'll also have that message sent to the end users. So the benefit from that is if I disabled software update because I was not sure that 10.15.4 wasn't going to break something and I needed that off for a few days, it's actually going to remind me to turn that on. And hopefully, as people start doing that, you'll see the overall compliance status of your environment go up. So what the end user would know after changing that is they would just hit rescan, and the machine is going to get rescanned in the next 5 or 6 minutes, and then they'll get the results saying, okay, you've actually fixed that properly, it's enabled, you're good to go. And then if I go back to my web browser, that dashboard in a few minutes would get updated saying you have one more Mac that is compliant with the setting for auto update, but you also have one more Mac that is fully compliant. And we have two different ways we receive data in Uptycs. One of which is really real time for security alerts, right? Like we detect malware, you'll get the alerts for that in a matter of seconds. This goes to the global database so we can get the dashboards and everything. So usually it only takes a few minutes and you'll get the update right there and the user will get the message telling them that they're good to go. So there's other use cases to this other than security. Taking IT, for example, if you ever have something that you're deploying that is not fully centralized, fully automated, or the end user needs to take any kind of action, as long as the data is in OS Query, you'll be able to do that. And if you're not familiar with OS Query, well, the OS Query website has a great schema on it that tells you what data is available on it. We have the equivalent in our platform here. So if I select macOS, as you can see, I'm able to create browser plugins, Chrome extensions, what certificates are installed on the machine, what drives are mounted, is Time Machine configured properly, right? Maybe you don't allow people to back up to their own drives that they manage, so you're able to track that with Uptycs. So with the combination of the global database that lets you know what's going on machines, but also go back in time, right? I showed you the dashboard that lets you see back in time, but we also allow you to run a query and go back in time. I selected from my users before, you could do that for yesterday if you wanted to see that, oh, this user account didn't exist yesterday. So the power of that database, dashboards, reports, and the ability to have end users enforce configurations on their own when it's valuable makes it a great platform, not only for security in general and threat hunting, but also for improving the compliance of your different machines. And right now we support Mac, and we're considering supporting Windows and Linux in the future. Just gonna go back to the slides. So user-driven security really allows you to distribute the effort of securing systems because you're letting the end users, execute that effort and fix machines on their own when they have the permissions, right? Of course, if someone is not a local admin, you should be enforcing these settings anyway. And Uptycs really gives you open visibility into your Macs in real time and over time. And another big thing we're doing right now is we're implementing the attack framework, the MITRE attack framework. So all the events and alerts that you get are mapped to something standard. So we've got a few questions. One is Lee would love to see the CIS reporting. I'm not in a demo environment where I can really show that, but what I can do is I can show you a report which will not be executed. So all of our reports are SQL based, and we show you all the information about CIS, right? Turn off the Bluetooth, what does CIS tell you to do to check it manually and all of that. And we also show you the SQL that we use for that. The reason we do that is so you can show your auditors, hey, this is how it's checked. This is the actual query. So it's not like a foggy black box environment. So this just generates a PDF report where it just generates a report where like all the machines that are succeeding or failing each specific check. We have another question around deployment. So deploying Uptycs, the most common way people deploy it is they download the package that they need for whatever operating system, right? Let's say Mac. Then you've got two options. You can download it pre-configured, where you just install it and it reports back to Uptycs and it goes to the right tenant and gets all the configuration from the cloud. Or you can separate that if you want to push the secret manually or with different tools. We've got customers that push the configuration separately, others that do it bundled in a package. And if you don't have the ability to push updates really easily, you don't have great package management, we also have an auto update feature. So once you've installed it, it will stay up to date. So yes, you require the OS query daemon on every machine that's running out there. That's what reports that data over TLS. And just a little bit out of the scope of Mac, if you're using containers, right, you're using Kubernetes or Docker, you don't need to install it in every container. We've got deployment models where you can run it on the host or like a daemon set container to limit the amount of installs that you have. So I hope that answers your question, Batman.